Before securing the universal bracket in place, the installer will confirm that the wall surface is level or plumb. To do this, use a long straight edge to do a horizontal check for flatness along the stud bays. You must also vertically check each stud that the bracket will be anchored to. Check adjacent studs out to 3 bays to ensure uniformity. Waves from poorly constructed framing material will become more apparent as the wall construction continues. Report any flaws you encounter to the GC for correction. Remove the universal bracket from the shipping container and arrange the components for identification. For new construction, the dealer will need to use the optional stud mount rails. The stud mount rails are designed with a workable range of 12 to 24 inches or 300 to 600 millimeters. If you'll be mounting them to studs or joists with less than 16 inches on center, the stud mount rails will need to be shortened. To shorten the stud mount rail, remove the 4 screws. Pull the inner rail and the outer rail apart. The sliding plate will fall out. Remove the 4 screws from the sliding plate. Next, cut the bottom notches on both sides of the stud mount rail. Flex the stud mount rail at the notches until the smaller section breaks away. Discard the smaller pieces. Reassemble the stud mount rail by sliding the inner rail into the outer rail. Use 2 of the 4 screws you removed to reattach the inner rail to the outer rail. Insert the sliding plate into the back of the rail and reattach it to the rails using the 4 screws you removed previously. Repeat this process with the other stud mount rail. Before attaching the stud mount rails to the universal bracket, it is important to bend the wire tab guide out. You will not be able to do this once the stud mount rails are attached. To attach the stud mount rails to the universal bracket, loosen the 4 screws on the sliding plate on the first stud mount rail. Depending on the size of the bracket, you will use either 2 inner or 2 outer screws to anchor the stud mount rail to the universal bracket. Screw into the center of the tabs without making them too tight. A little wiggle room will aid in fine-tuning. The stud mount rail should slide and adjust easily. Repeat this process with the other stud mount rail. Center the universal bracket assembly into position on the studs or joists and determine its approximate final location. Using screws appropriate for the framing material, anchor the top rail in place without fully tightening the screws. Once the top rail is in place, anchor the bottom rail in the same manner. You will need at least 4 screws depending on the size of the universal bracket. Confirm the universal bracket adjusts freely up and down and side to side. Fine-tune the location of the universal bracket assembly and confirm it is level. Once you have ensured the universal bracket is level, tightly anchor the 4 screws to the stud mount rails. Next, tightly anchor the entire universal bracket assembly to the studs. Verify the rotozip barrier is resting on top of the mud dam and is far below the outer flange as possible. If it is not, push on the rotozip barrier until it is in this fully recessed position. If you have not yet threaded the speaker wire through the wire tab guide, do so now. At this point, the drywall crew can begin. The drywaller will put the drywall in place over the universal bracket. Using a rotozip or similar tool, the drywaller will cut out the opening for the speaker. The rotozip barrier is a guide and stop mechanism for a drywall cutting tool. When the drywaller finishes hanging the drywall, you may resume the installation of the universal bracket. Remove the rotozip barrier screws and discard. Temporarily remove the paint shield in order to access the mud dam. Confirm all the mud dam locking tabs are pulled out. The mud dam is adjustable and can now be ratcheted out to the desired height above the drywall. To do this, pull on the mud dam until it is proud of the drywall. Then use a level or the flat end of a straight edge to push the mud dam flush to the wall. Now you will adjust the mud dam to match the thickness of the finish coat by pulling it out 1 click at a time. Each click represents 1/16 of an inch or 2 millimeters. And the mud dam can be pulled out a total of 1.5 inches or 38 millimeters maximum from the surface of the universal bracket. For common skim coat, pull out the mud dam 1 click. If the skim coat is thicker, such as Venetian plaster, you will need additional clicks to match the thickness of the final finish. When the desired height is reached, push the 4 locking tabs into the mud dam. If needed, you can unlock the locking tabs by using a screwdriver to pull them back out. You will notice a slight gap between the mud dam and the surrounding drywall. This is a result of the cutting tool. Seal the gap with an all-purpose construction adhesive, such as Power Grab, to create a bridge between the mud dam and the surrounding wall. Once dried, this will prevent any excess joint compound from entering the wall. Details of the adhesive application process are covered in the finishing process section. Replace the paint shield in the universal bracket. Once this is done, you can alert the general contractor that the wall or ceiling can be turned over to the next trade for finishing, in this case, a drywaller. You must return from time to time to inspect the installation and ensure the process is continuing as planned. To complete your installation, go to the finishing process section.